Hello and welcome everyone to this session at the Portland Retro Gaming Expo. My name is Dan Kitchen, and I have the honor of being with Garry Kitchen, my brother, fellow game designer, and of course David Crane, one of the co-founders of Activision. The panel is entitled Dan Kitchen's Gold Rush, and actually I'm going to touch on that for just a minute, but the panel is much more than that. It's really about Activision, the Activision memories that the three of us enjoyed while working there. So it's really not a panel specifically about that game. To briefly touch on that, that was a game that I had started at Activision in 1983. Garry's smash hit Keystone Kapers had just come out, and he had moved on to Pressure Cooker at the time, and I had finished my Crackpots game, and I had started playing with some displays and doing a little train display, and I think Garry had mentioned, hey, why don't you put Keystone Kelly up there? And inevitably, the ROM or the video you see online as a prototype of this was coming around when at Activision the 1983 crash occurred, and they pulled us off the Atari, and I actually made a cartridge of that little prototype, put it away. It was lost for time, and just last year, happening to clean out one of my storage facilities, I found the original ROM and showed it to Garry and to a number of people, and our friends at the National Video Game Museum were excited to accept it as a donation. And about that time, Garry had turned me on to some new tools to write 2600 games, and so I decided to take the game I had started in 1983 and finally finish it. And so, since I do not have the rights to Keystone Kelly or Keystone Kapers, I renamed it Gold Rush. I was hoping to have it released this year, but I'm going to be releasing it sometime early in 2020. You can go to my site to check out updates on it, and I have a series of collectible trading cards that I'm giving out at the shows that I frequent throughout the year, and you can come up here and get your collectible trading card for this year's Portland Retro Gaming Expo. And one of the things that will be available when the game ships will be a set of trading cards for all of the characters. I'm hoping to create or recreate the essence of Activision. So 2600 games, the game will have patches you can win, and really trying to bring back a lot of the things that Dave and Al and Bob and Larry did at Activision, which was to really put you in the game and create a fan club and create buzz about that. And I have some other games to follow up, and that's it for Gold Rush. So thank you for coming, thinking that you would be hearing that. But I really want to open it up to a much broader discussion with Garry and Dave.
In fact, we're finished.
That's it. Thank you. Thank you. Send a self-addressed envelope, and
actually, we're going to be next door at the end of this. You can.
Yes, at the end of this, you can come by and pick up a card. But the panel was initially conceived to be much more of Activision memories with Garry and Dave and myself. So I'll turn this over to Dave now. Mr. Crane?
Mr. Crane. Well, you know, everybody knows Keystone Kapers. Garry did Keystone Kapers. We should probably, since this is kind of, at least based on the title of this thing, we're talking about Dan's recreation of the sequel he was doing to Keystone Kapers. Garry and I did have some involvement in Keystone. I mean, Garry, of course, wrote the whole thing, but
Yes, Dave. It came with some feedback from Dave. So Dan and I joined Activision in June of 1982. As you probably know, Activision was West Coast based. Dave had a design group out there. Dave, Al, Bob, and Larry. Steve Cartwright, soon to join, and Carol Shaw, soon to join. And we came out to visit them from the East Coast, and it fit very well into their strategy because they really believed that a quality product comes out of a tight-knit group of creative people, and they didn't want to put too many creative people in one place because it could blow the synergy of what they had that was working so well. So we come waltzing in, and we might as well be in Australia for what it matters to them. We're far away. And that was a real appeal because they knew we wouldn't, go into their environment and potentially break the synergy, we would have our own synergy. So we started the East Coast office, have our own group of guys, most notably John Van Ryzen, who ended up doing Hero in that office, which I know has become a real popular game. And Keystone was the first thing I was working on. And originally, it was a vertical game. I had just finished Donkey Kong for Coleco, and I had in my mind that the cop was going to be climbing up the outside of a building, and the crook was going floor to floor inside the department store, and you could see him through windows. You'd see him run by a window, and at certain windows he would stop and grab a piece of product from the store and throw it out the window down at the cop. So the cop would be dodging as he went up. Little crazy climber in there. And I had started that. We don't have the code, unfortunately. We don't have a ROM, but I had vertical scrolling game working. And Dave came out and I mean, at that point, I didn't have much of a synergy with Dave. We'd met him once or twice and got hired. So he came out and, you know, as is the case with a bunch of young guys from New Jersey, Dave's coming out. Not that he was intimidating. He had probably just been on the cover of Delta In-Flight magazine or something, which I think is probably true. So we were all scared to death. And Dave came out and he looked at it. And he had just finished some game in the jungle. I forget the name of that game, but it didn't do very well. But anyway, he looked at what I did, and we brainstormed, and he said, maybe you should do it horizontally, like that failed game in the jungle thing I did. Because that has pioneered this screen-to-screen. And it was a good idea, obviously, so I switched it. Gave me an opportunity to use this crazy escalator that I had been fooling around with, because now we went horizontal, we go floor to floor that way. And it changed the game completely, and obviously worked. And that was really the first example of what Dave and I have now done together for the last 40 years. I mean, we collaborate on many, many things, as Dan and Dave do as well, but Dave and I especially, since that time, have collaborated both from a code standpoint. We can read each other's code. We've done projects where I've written parts and he's written parts. Creatively, we collaborate, and we've worked together ever since. So it's been a great partnership. So that was Keystone Kapers, and ended up finishing it in about 6 months, and it did pretty well. I was very proud of it.
Sold a considerable number of units.
Yeah, it did all right. It was 700,000 or 800,000 units, around there.
Yeah.
Now, when we do talks like this, we usually ask who has seen us before and do a talk like this. No, some. Because
And you're back?
we tell a lot of stories.
Yes, it worked.
And we don't want to tell the same stories that everyone's always heard before, because then we don't want to be boring. So we could do Q&A if you want, where if there are very particular things about our careers that you've wondered about, just throw them out and we can talk about them. Or if you want to at least give us a topic that you're really interested in, we can go off in that direction. We don't have a formal presentation. We rarely ever do.
Well, but usually one thing leads to another. And
Right.
Your discussion of collaboration is kind of interesting. I mean, specifically, Gary and I developed the Buenos Blob on the NES. And we were 3,000 miles apart, because I was always on the West Coast, he was always on the East Coast. And that was kind of fun, only because I was doing the code base, and he was for the main game, and generally the general overall code. And then he was writing code for Blobolonia. Once you flew from Earth to Blobolonia, it was a different game. So it was easier to collaborate because it was kind of like level 1, level 2. But he had to write code on my code base, which meant he had to have the latest code base. So every night, I went on AOL, and I did an upload that took 7 or 8 hours. that would be waiting for him in the morning. So we did an overnight upload through AOL. And those were the good old days of using modems and modem standards like X modem and Z modem and Kermit and those kind of things. But actually AOL was better than any of them because it could restart a failed upload. We'd go back and say, okay, I got most of it, but I'll go back and get the rest. So that was pretty fun, you know. You could actually set it off and literally check it at 4 o'clock in the morning. It's almost done, almost done.
And then we could play Dave's new build every day, so that was cool.
Yeah.
Right.
But there were other collaborations. You know, these upstart kids out there on the East Coast. You know, he's absolutely right. We at Activision we pioneered what we called the design center concept, and it was, you know, it came about because of the way we started the company. We started the company with 4 game designers and a business guy, and the 4 of us had worked together at Atari. We went to lunch together. We knew we worked together well. And we started to think, you know, if we could start getting 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 guys in this room, we aren't going to have the same synergy. We're not going to have the same ability to kibitz off of each other's work, and there's too many distractions and such. So when Garry came along, you know, he had called Activision and said, I make Atari 2600 games, we should talk. And the guy he talked to at Activision said, no, you don't. We're the only ones, you know, Atari and us are the only ones who make Atari 2600 games. So yeah, it was absolutely a great fit. We said, these guys are already a group. There were already about 4 of them at the time. And we set up an office in New Jersey for them to go to. So we would go out there every once in a while just to go over what they're doing and help out and offer suggestions and that sort of thing. But sometimes there were other things that would happen. Like, everybody knows that one of the first things we did at Activision is we put the Activision logo at the bottom of the TV screen, right? That was kind of a fun thing. And the Activision logo originally, I mean, it's always looked kind of the same. It went through some minor modifications over the years, but the earliest games we did, they're probably still there. I don't know what the Dragster logo looks like, but
No, I checked, they're still there.
it's the old,
It's the old logo,
lowercase
yeah.
a on the logo and such. And then we kept doing it. Bob Whitehead tweaked it, and he said, you know, I can put the flying V type A on this thing, and he tweaked that. And one day, we got this ROM from these upstart boys in New Jersey, and it had a little bit of the Activision rainbow on that.
Did you have it?
Yeah. The
And-
nerve,
I forgot about
the
that.
nerve to do that.
It wasn't the one that you see now. It was just a small 8-bit wide, horizontal, you know, rectangular. It didn't have the slope or whatever.
Right, hanging off the left edge.
And
of
it
the
was
A.
just kind of sitting there. And I then took that and rewrote the high-speed kernel to make it slope and angle it down and this kind of stuff. But, you know, everybody was just kind of like touching whatever they could to say, hey, I can make this a little better, I can make this a little better.
Yeah.
And so even though we didn't have everybody in the same group, the groups had synergy, you know? The groups
Well,
would help each other.
And another great example of that people generally don't know is Dave had this crisis scheduled to do Ghostbusters on the Commodore 64. It was every movie project is a crisis schedule because it lags. So the game has to come out because it's close to the movie coming out, and you don't have the assets until the movie's about to come out, so it's always a nightmare. But Dave was doing Commodore 64 Ghostbusters, and he called me up and said, I got a project for you if you're interested. And I said, yeah, sure, what? He said, you know, we're playing the song on the opening screen. I need one of those bouncing balls, you know, the ones that hit the lyrics right at the beat. So I wrote that. So that was my claim to fame on Ghostbusters, was the bouncing ball. And if you watch it, it hits the lyrics perfectly all the way.
Except it wraps around, it goes off the right and comes on the left.
Which is really weird.
In the old days, they would bounce.
They would bounce back, right?
Yeah, I sat in the room next to Garry and heard that over and over and over again.
Yeah. So that was another fine kitchen crane collaboration there. And then Dan ended up doing 2600 Ghostbusters,
Yes.
which was actually, some people say is one of the best 2600 games ever done. It was pretty amazing. And we had a lot of fun working on that one.
We did. That was a really tight schedule. I think it was, 3 months we have to ship it, and Garry and I did most of the kernel. Garry came and helped and did the map work and did some of the other work. And we worked together to do that and get it done.
Any burning questions that you've always wanted to ask these crazy people up here? Yes?
I want to ask Dan about, you did F-14 Tomcat.
I did.
2600, right? I wanted to ask if there's any particular technical challenges of that, making that game. It's a pretty advanced looking and tiny game, 2600.
Thank you.
So that was a question on F-14 Tomcat and 2600, if there were any technical challenges, just in case you didn't hear.
I was with Garry at Absolute at the time. The main displays is kind of just a reuse of a score kernel to do all of those different displays. And in hindsight, I probably would have made it more of a game and less of a simulator. I've gone back and played it a bunch now. The real challenge to me I had on that was unfortunately, most people do not get to the point where they can land, but I do have a pseudo first-person aircraft carrier landing at night.
Yeah.
And so I did that with the ball and the missile and a little light coming down the landing strip that kind of moves down like you'd see on an actual landing strip. And I think that was probably one of the toughest things to try to recreate what I've seen videos of F-14s landing on carriers at night, where you really just have the few lights that pointed out in the tower there. But overall, I think probably doing the main display in the cockpit was the most challenge, because I tried to replicate as much as I could in a 2600 what an F-14 actually did with the swoop wings and with the correct amount of thrust to weight ratio or weight to thrust ratio and the gallons of fuel they had and the ECMs. And I copied a lot of the maps and things I'd seen in aircraft books. Back then we didn't have the internet, so I'd go and get these books, and one of the guys in the office who helped do our marketing had befriended a guy in the Navy, actually, who was an F-14 driver. And I think we bought some aircraft pictures from him for maybe one of John Van Ryzen's games, F-18 or...
Yeah, he did some of the photography we used on the cover.
And so from that relationship, I had gotten some books that you could purchase that were about F-14s, and I tried to replicate as much as I could the ECM screens, the CW screens, caution and warning, and so.
I thought that was a country western.
Oh, and the country western screen in there as well. So yeah, I would say the main cockpit was the hardest part, but it was a lot of fun doing that.
And yes, it's a challenge, but it's also the most fun thing we ever did.
Yes.
You know, you gotta understand that. And the 2600 was designed to play tank and pong, and every game that was done that wasn't tank or pong required some technological trick, some way of manipulating the hardware into doing something it didn't intend to do. The Dragster was, prior to Dragster, there wasn't, say 6 months prior to Dragster, you couldn't put 6 digits of display on an Atari screen. And every game after that was invented had a 6-digit score. I mean, and his cockpit was the 6-digit score kernel, was basically, it was a technique that was developed that made the 2600 do things that their designers never intended. I was sitting at Atari working on that very thing, and it was just up on the screen for the first time, the 6-digit score, when the designer of the video chip in the Atari, Jay Miner, was walking through the lab, and I felt this presence of somebody standing behind me. I looked back, and it was Jay, and he was shaking his head. You know, what's up? And he said, I had no idea that my chip could do that. That was the thrill that we got of making this hardware do things that it was never intended. So you ask, what was the challenge? I mean, the three of us up here know that what you were asking is, what was the most fun part?
Right. That's well said, David, yes.
You know, I always like the funny anecdotes, and Dan's discussion on F-14, the question on F-14, brings up one quick little anecdote, not exactly related to F-14, but related to the next flight game we did on the 7800 called F-18 Hornet, which was actually John Van Ryzen did that one. And when, as Absolute, we were publishing those Atari games, and it was pretty standard when you published a game to file a trademark for the name, if you could get a trademark for the name. And trademark is you register the name with the government, and you have exclusive rights to that name within the area of product. The way our lawyer used to explain it was, the way trademarks work is you can have Cadillac cars, but you as an individual could go trademark Cadillac if you want to use it for dog food, because it's two different genres. So I registered F-18 Hornet for software, and the registration went through, and that was it, we owned it. Many years later, I had one of the best phone calls I've ever had, probably 7, 8 years later, when I got a call from the general counsel of McDonnell Douglas, who said, "We have a problem. I want the name of my jet back." And I didn't understand what he was saying until he made it clear that you own my trademark. And I said, no, I own it in software. He goes, well, we do flight simulators now for training of our jets, and I want my name back.
We had it in class 9 or something.
Yes, so we were patriotic individuals. We were glad to sell him back the name of his jet.
Graciously gave him back his
Not gave.
sold him back his
Sold him back
$25 million
his-
aircraft name.
And it was
billion.
it was a fine moment. Next, anybody? Over there.
Yeah, so I was, last night, Watch Out for Fireballs podcast was taping here, and they highlighted Ghoul School as one of their games, like a hidden gem they really liked. Do you have any memories of that?
Oh, God, yeah. Ghoul School, NES.
Yeah.
We had this contractor that worked for us. He wasn't, no, maybe he was an employee at that point. I'm not sure.
No, I think he was a contractor.
I think he was a contractor. Scott Marshall. He was a brilliant musician and a game programmer. He had worked at RCA as an engineer, and I really liked Scott. He was a great guy. And he had this idea for years. And he finally made it, and I thought it was very clever. It was a good game, very clever. Honestly, probably no one in this room has heard it, but if you finish that game, you finish it, literally finish the game, he plays a song at the end, and I'll tell you, it's such a good song that he wrote. And all I remember in my mind is, God, that song was so good, but you've got to finish the game to get to it. Yeah, it was published, I think, by Electrobrain.
Yes, that's right.
Boy, there's a name. It was published by Electrobrain, and they were one of our clients at the time. They were handling some distribution. But yeah, I think it was a pretty unsung game. Not a lot of people played it, and I thought it was pretty good.
Scott had also, previous to that, had done RC Grand Prix on the Sega Master System for us, which was a very nice game as well.
Yeah, Scott was a good programmer.
He was.
Yeah. And what do you call that? Does anybody know, what do you call that very innovative musical instrument that you don't touch, you use your hands?
The theremin, yeah.
He is a world expert in that instrument, and he has been for many, many years. If you look it up, you'll learn about Scott Marshall. You'll find him online. I know he always had a passion for that, and he was a tremendous pianist. He's still around. Okay? Go ahead.
Random question, but with Activision games for the Atari, why were there so few paddle games?
It's because as a designer, you never make a game for a subset of the audience. You want to download. You want to sell 1 million units, and if you have to get a large audience for that, and you're worried about not having the paddles.
Although paddles came in every box, I think. Did they? Or not later on?
No, they came with a cart, right? Wasn't there a
No,
cart?
you're talking about something else. But yeah, I mean, Kaboom was. We could just say that Kaboom was the best paddle game ever made. Why go farther?
And Warlords for Atari. That was amazing.
Well, the other thing about the paddles is because if you plugged in 2 paddle controllers, there's 2 each on each cable. So it's the only way you could get 4 buttons, a button in the hand of each of 4 people. So I think Carol Shaw did a a horse game at Atari, something horse racing or whatever, and there were 4 of them. So you would, the steeplechase.
Steeplechase,
It was their
right.
steeplechase game, so she
So-
used paddles to do that.
So is it true that not everyone had a,
I'm not sure about, I think every 2600 did have the paddle controller.
The original large
yeah, but
box.
maybe once all of the small ones
Right,
came out, they stopped packing them in.
Right, I think you're right.
The
Is that
thing
right?
is-
Does anybody know? Yeah.
This one came with a paddle that stopped on the, it didn't go all the way around and around.
Okay.
Ah,
Well, yeah, what you were talking about, Gary, was the driving controller that came with Indy 500.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Okay.
that was not a potentiometer, that was a gray-coded controller that on the four wires of the joystick, it put out a 4-bit code. And a gray coding is, if you have if you're trying to detect a turning knob and you have the thing go 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, you actually have, in binary, you have 2 bits changing at the same time when it goes from 3 to 0. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 0, 1, 2, 3, 0, 1, 2, 3. There's a problem when it goes from 3 to 0 because 2 bits change and you can get a misreading. So gray coding of 4 bits is 0, 1, 3, 2, 0, 1, 3, 2, 0, 1, 3, 2. And that's how this thing works. It does this gray coding controller. So it goes all the way around and the number that comes out of it is either 0, 1, 3, or 2 in sequence. And it was impacted with the Atari Indy 500 cartridge. And never again, and not for sale separately, I don't think. So that was the real crime, was it was kind of a cool controller. If you wanted to do something went all the way around, didn't have that stop on it like a potentiometer. But, we just looked at each other and said, nobody will ever make another driving controller game because they have to have bought Indy 500 to even have it.
Yeah. That's always been a problem with fancy peripherals that didn't come with every system. Okay, yes.
How much input into the box art did you have as the game designer? Because just from my own personal experience, a lot of the enjoyment of Activision games was the romantic part of the box art and just how beautiful it was. I'm just kind of curious as to how much input you guys had on what your box design was.
Well, I'll let Dave answer this, but I'll just say that us being 3,000 miles away, the answer is we had none. At least Dave could walk down the hallway and talk to somebody. We didn't. We loved it. The marketing, Activision's marketing was second to none. But what was your experience being in the same building,
It
Dave?
was actually one of the founding principles of Activision. I mean, when we started the company, we wanted the creators of games to have credit like an author of a book, that sort of thing. But we also marched into the office of Jim Levy, the president, and we said, what really sucks is you look at some of these games, you can't tell what the game is by looking at the box. You have no idea what you're buying, right? So we said, we're putting our foot down here. The cover of the box has got to be the exact picture on the Atari 2600 off the TV set. We insist. And he sat there and argued with us for a number of hours, I think. But what we ended up compromising that on the back of the box would be a stylized picture of what the game screen looks like. It's not exactly pixel for pixel because you might want to put, like in the Pitfall one, I think you see both.
you do.
A log and
A log
a
and a
fire,
gator.
whatever it is, the things, they don't actually exist on the same screen, but it's stylized and it's pretty much in the 8-bit, art format. And then the cover could be something that's creative. We didn't go as crazy as some of the games at Atari. I mean, my favorite one, if I can put quotes around favorite, was Breakout.
Breakout, yeah.
I mean, I haven't looked to confirm this, but my recollection is that when you look at the manual of the Breakout, the first words are, you're flying through space, and you encounter a multicolored force field. Now, is that what Breakout is to you? So, yeah, we just didn't like it. We didn't want to go that way, but Jim Levy was our marketing guy, and he was right. He said, you don't necessarily have to put this ugly pixel art on the front of the box, but we'll put something on the back so that you're not selling a pig in a poke. You'll know what you're buying when you get the game.
I seem to recall the first 4 didn't have that. I remember the first 4 boxes, the back just had the illustration of the 2 joysticks. And
Really?
Yeah. And
That's
no
an
pictures.
Atari thing to have the joysticks pictured on the back, I think. These guys would know better than us.
Yeah, I thought maybe boxing or checkers.
He is
No.
correct.
That is correct. There are, I don't know if it was the first four, I'd have to go back and look at all of my boxes, but there are some that just have a text.
Right, text and a little,
then just two.
Really?
right, two joysticks.
God, I don't remember
Yeah,
that.
saying four joystick controller.
Damn.
Well, boxing was number 2, and I remember the boxing
Yeah.
screenshot on the back.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's why, I don't know if it was the first four, but I know that
Maybe
there were
right.
some that were like that.
Wow.
I don't know, I still think that was Atari.
What was number
not us.
one?
Dragster, boxing, checkers, fishing derby, skiing, bridge were our first 6.
Okay. And you did two
I did fishing derby and dragster, yes.
in
Go ahead.
about 5 months?
Yeah.
When you left Atari to form Activision, what development systems did you use, or did you guys invent your own for Activision?
I was the engineer in the group. When I went to Atari, nobody knew I was an engineer because I was just doing software. But yes, I was the guy who built all the boxes. And first thing I had to do when we left Atari is first I had to reverse engineer the Atari 2600 and create a manual. And then shortly thereafter, I had to create a development system. And yeah, the development system was a metal box. Ultimately became a blue box because we were using, I think LMB was the company that made these boxes you could buy. And the blue box had an Atari 2600 sitting on the top and a wire, what do you call it?
Cable.
Ribbon cable umbilical that came out of the box. And basically what we did was we plugged a cartridge into the Atari 2600, and that cartridge was a RAM. It looked like a ROM, but it was a RAM. It wasn't exactly a ROM simulator because we also had intelligence in it for doing debugging and such. But yeah, I built 4 of those before I could even start working on Dragster, and still did Dragster and Fishing Derby by
I did not know
January.
that.
Yeah.
Goddamn overachiever.
Yeah, really.
Jesus.
Now, that was the West Coast. The East Coast, Gary had designed, we used Apple computers.
Yeah, so
Early on.
I built a RAM board that emulated the ROM and built an umbilical cord, hand-wired board that went into the slot in the Apple II, and then an umbilical cord that plugged in as a cartridge into a 2600, and had a little machine language routine that when you were all done with your Merlin assembler, Merlin was a 6502 assembler, you had your binary file, you hit a control key, and very quickly, in seconds, it downloaded that into the card, which to the 2600 looked like a ROM, and up came the game. We had no debugging. That was our development system, and I used that to write Space Jockey and Donkey Kong. Yeah.
But
And,
this was way later in like 1982 when
When
you were doing this stuff.
80, yes, this was way after you. It was
Well,
81.
When did you do
No, I was working on Space Jockey in 80.
80? Okay.
Yeah.
Because
And I
in
was working on Donkey Kong
79,
in
in
81.
79 it was much harder.
Definitely. Well, and you had debug.
Dave had stone knives and bearskins.
When we started Activision, we budgeted $60,000 to buy a PDP-11 computer because at the time there weren't home computers. You had to have the closest thing to a mainframe computer, which was the PDP-11. And we wanted to buy a PDP-11/30 or something like that, and it was a 2-month lead time. So we couldn't do that. We had to get started. So we ended up going over to Hamilton Avnet, which is a computer distributor, part distributor, and they had a PDP-1103, one of the earliest PDP-11s, sitting on their showroom floor. And, it had a for sale sign on it, and we bought it. It was the slowest, PDP-11 ever made, probably. And we set it up in a quote-unquote timeshare environment where we had one computer and 4 people designing games. And we had a whole bunch of switch boxes.
Right.
Because everybody connected through an RS-232 to a dumb terminal.
To a VT100.
It wasn't even a VT100, it was
Not
an
then?
ADM3. It was a dumb terminal, as dumb as they get.
Dumb as good.
And so basically, the way we just developed a game is you brought up a word processing program on the PDP-11 and routed all the switches in such a way that you were the one talking to the PDP-11. And you would type and you would edit your program. Then you would run the assembler, and when the assembler was done, you would download the object code from the assembler into your box. Then you could flip the switches and someone else could work.
And what were the other people doing?
A manual
What the
network.
other people were doing was we had printed out we printed listings of every change we ever made, and then we were writing in code changes while the other person was editing. The 11T03 was a slow machine. It was running a cross assembler that was written in Fortran that was running on this machine. A 2K game took 20 minutes to compile. 2 KB took 20 minutes to compile. You do that today, before you let go of the key, it's compiled.
Right.
Right? 20 minutes. So for 20 minutes, and then Larry started doing Bridge, which was a 4K, which took 40 minutes.
And people were like, come on, Larry, I need the computer.
So we'd write in our changes, and then what do? You pretty much
Press
done.
button, go to lunch?
No, we just walk around the office. And, Levy would see us walking around the office and said, somebody's compiling, huh? Yeah. Yeah, that was really sucked. But it took us about a year to finally get a fast enough machine to timeshare on.
And on top of that, you still did the 2 games in 5 months with the development
Well,
system.
and the thing that Dave is really kind of skimming over was when they went to Hamilton AbNet, they didn't actually have a PDP-11. Dave had to make one. He made the PDP-11 before he made the development systems and before he wrote the 2 games.
Now you're just being ridiculous.
All right, next question. Anything? Go ahead.
Was it some Activision policy that none of the scores ever rolled over on any of the games that they ever released? 'Cause it seemed
Like rolled over back to 0?
Yeah, like, it seemed like it always ended.
Well, that's because there were only 6 digits. And it didn't make sense to roll over.
Well, we wanted that exclamation point. What did you do in Laser Blast?
Exclamation points.
Yeah.
I don't think there was a policy.
I don't think there was a policy. Certainly, once we decided we were doing patches and that sort of thing, we had to have real scores. And when you do a 6-digit score, you can pretty much decide, based on how many points each thing is, that somebody has to play for a decade to roll over 1 million. Laser Blast was an exception. Laser Blast was kind of an interesting game when you first pick it up, and you probably die in 6 seconds, right? You pick up this game and you start to move, and the lasers shoot you, and you fall. And then your next life comes, lasers shoot you. So it's one of those games that it happened so fast, it was over so fast, that I added joystick reset, which, this was a real early time in video games. We were innovating every day. I mean, you can look at a lot of our games and say, gee, that would have never been done before. That had never been done before. I don't think a joystick reset had ever been done before, where I was too lazy to reach up and hit restart. So if you died, you could just move the joystick and start your new game. But once you got the rhythm on Laser Blast, you could never die. I mean, you could play this game forever. And in the slowest mode, like game 1, you could max the score in 5.5 hours. If you played the faster one, where the enemies were much faster, still, if you got the rhythm, you could continue to play and do it in about 3.5 hours. The mistake that I made in innovating a joystick reset is I should have disabled that feature after you finished the game where you actually won the game. Because we got letters from consumers with requests for patches and that sort of thing. And we got one letter from a young child who said, I played Laser Blast, and I played it for 5.5 hours, and I got the all exclamation points, which represents 1 million points, and I was so exhausted that I dropped the joystick and it reset the game. And I was not able to take a picture. Right below the tear stains on that letter was the note from the mother who says, I was there, I can attest, Johnny got...
Signed affidavit.
Please send him his patch.
And they still wouldn't give him the patch.
No. Of course we gave him the patch.
What else? All the way to the back.
So, I'm sorry if this has already been asked, I guess it maybe hasn't. I was digging around some import games and I found a game that was called Mysterious Blobby. And it happened to be, unbeknownst to me, a Japanese version of A Boy and His Blob. And I was playing it and I noticed that all the graphics had been changed on it, which I thought was part of the charm. This is one of my favorite games of all time. And I was wondering if you could share some insight as to how that type of change would happen during localization.
I cannot believe you asked that because Dave just brought it up yesterday.
Yeah.
Didn't? Oh, yes.
And we haven't talked about that in 30 years.
Well, first of all, there was a lot of piracy in video games. There are collectors probably in this audience who have all 19 variations of Bob Whitehead's boxing game, you know, whatever. Because there are a lot of countries that we didn't sell in. Nobody sold into those countries, so they thought it's fair game. They just take our ROMs, duplicate our ROMs, put them in a box, whatever. My favorite one was an Activision game in a box that with a company name of Otari. But anyways, there was a lot of the piracy. But, you know, Gary and I have worked together for a long time, and you look at Activision today, and they make $10 billion selling whatever the latest Call of Duty is or whatever. They spent $100 million making it, so it's their right to make a lot of money, I think. But we liked to work in small companies. I mean, Activision turned out to be a pretty big company, but thereafter, Gary and I always worked together on small companies. And you get to do your own work. You don't have people looking over your shoulder deciding what you can and can't make, and there's a lot of good things about that. But the bad thing is the electric utility needs to be paid every month, You got to keep the lights on. So while we're working on some speculative new game that's going to take a year to come out, we will do things. We'll do client work. We'll do, versions or whatever. And A Boy and His Blob is one of those. It was critical success, financial success somewhat, but it wasn't sold in Japan. And we were approached by a company called Jaleco. And Jaleco said, we want to take A Boy and His Blob into Japan, and we'll make a deal, a distribution deal, and that's all well and good. And they said, but the graphics are not Japanese enough. Okay. So, I don't know, I think we may have said, all right, you draw us what you think is a Japanese boy.
I think they did, yeah.
And they made a more Mario-looking character, a little squat little guy, and whatever. And so I created that game and modified the graphics and did all that, and we sold it off through a distribution deal. So there is a Japanese version of A Boy and His Blob. Now, it sounds like you then got a pirated version of that one in some other country, because, well, where did you say it was?
Well, I translated. I got the Japanese, the Famicom cartridge called Fushigi no Blobi, but it's translated to Mysterious Blob.
Mysterious Blob, okay, yeah. Okay. I didn't remember of course I didn't remember what the title was. It was written in Japanese.
Yes, that's correct. We have time for like one more question, and after that, we're going to go retire to a table and sign autographs. If anyone is so bold as to ask for an autograph, we'll be glad to sign it. All right, either one of you go first. We'll do two.
So when adults get together, one of the first things they talk about is like, what is it that you do for work? Like back in the old Atari days, how did people react when you tried to explain to them what it was that you did?
I was at a party, and somebody said, so what do you do? And I said, I design video games. And a woman looks at me, she goes, I thought those were made by computers.
Inevitably, the next thing out of their mouth is, I have a game idea.
Yes, you hear a lot of that, though.
There is that, yes.
There is that.
But then there's also the trying to explain a game concept.
Right.
A Boy and His Blob, for example. I mean, I thought of A Boy and His Blob because I wanted to have a companion-type game where you had this companion that came along, and he was also your toolkit. So you would have a tool-using adventure game where you brought along this guy and that sort of thing. And, then we just started brainstorming on the whole thing. And I remember, people said, well, what's your latest game? Well, I have this game called A Boy and His Blob. Well, tell me about this game. I said, well, There's this shape-shifting blob, and he's your friend, and you throw jelly beans at him, and he eats them, and he transforms into various shapes, and then like he might change into a ladder, and you'll climb on him to go up. And he does this because he eats jelly beans. Oh yeah, well he's from a planet where all the vitamins are gone. You know, so yeah, people kind of wondered what I'd been smoking when I...
Go ahead.
As legacy people from Activision, you established Activision. Have you approached Activision about the PR promotion for Gold Rush?
I have not. I'm sure Activision is very much focused on their current billion-dollar products. But there are some potential things that I'd like to do in the future with some of the original Activision IPs. So I've actually begun some talks with them on those. And hopefully you'll hear about that at some other game cons.
Well, the whole market for this game is in this room anyway.
Right. I mean, we're not, you know, unfortunately, until someone re-releases a very cheap, inexpensive 2600, like they're doing with the Sega Genesis and the Nintendo 8-bit, and it sits on a shelf somewhere in Target, there's really not a mass market place to sell any of the new products that I would create.
You know, and it's funny, you would think that that's a logical thing to do, right? But what you learn when you've been in business, as long as we have, is there's a certain size that companies get where the opportunity cost of even taking a phone call from us
is not worth it.
It's not worth it.
Right.
So you say, look, you're not using Pitfall. Why don't you
Right.
license it to us? And they say, you know, it's going to cost us $200,000 to get the legal
Right, just
department
to do the
to draft the
paperwork,
contract.
to make $100,000
It's just not
of
worth
profit,
it. So that's the problem. You can't get their attention unless they're altruistic. And I don't know a lot of corporations that are altruistic. So
Sure.
they just don't want to be bothered.
What about the Amico and that?
We talk to Tommy all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah, every show we see Tommy, he shows us the latest thing he's doing. Funniest part was we're not doing anything on it yet. But we very quickly were at E3 and we were in there, they were demoing it, and in walked buyers from Walmart. And they spent the entire time oohing and eyeing over David Crane, somehow thinking that David Crane was doing an Amico game. But they haven't signed either of us to do an Amico game. So I thought that was pretty funny. We didn't correct their misconception.
You know, we're hoping Tommy does really well.
Yeah.
You know, we love the
All
vision.
for it.
Yeah, all for that, bringing something. And you know, some of us are still hoping the Atari VCS is a real product. But, you know, we'll see.
Yeah, philosophically, there's one thing that you have to think about is game developers develop game for someone's hardware. Right? Even if it's the iPhone, you're developing for someone's hardware. So when we founded Activision, the Atari 2600 had 20 million unit installed base, so they were our market. But we sat there and just watched the Intellivision. As soon as the Intellivision has 1 million units out there, we're going to make games for the Intellivision. So we are of the mindset as creators that lots of hardware, you know, everybody try to put out a piece of hardware. That's great. The one that wins is the one we'll work on. You know, it's simple as that. So, you know, we'd love to see all these things succeed and may do something on them if they do.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much
Thanks,
for
guys.
coming. Thank you.